Protocol requires me to, and rightly so, to address the Chair, but my instinct is in effect to address the gallery. I will do everything I can to help this bill through the Seanad. I am totally committed to it and I welcome it fully. I have no doubt that we will get the bill passed. We will get a strategy, an implementation strategy in relation to this matter. But what I am going to say tonight might seem to be a bit of a dampener. I am not so sure at all that we will get the promise of it delivered. I think that is the risk. I will be very happy to be 100% wrong in this, but I think it is better to raise these concerns, and they come out of my many years' experience of dealing with disability-related strategies. And let me just move it on. It is a night of hope, and I don't wish to be anything but hopeful in relation to this. But we need to face up to certain risks that are in our system. I don't believe for a moment that either the Minister or anybody else involved in this wishes other than to see this happen. The Minister's speech talked about strong collaboration and joined-up thinking will be required from a number of government departments and stakeholders to make sure that we provide the very best legislative solutions. That's an issue that has dogged public services in this country since Basil Chubb wrote about it in his book almost 50 years ago. We still have, in effect, 15 different governments, as he described it. We talk about joined-up work. It rarely happens. That is a real issue to this. This to work has to work within the health area and across a whole range of other departments. There is reference made to the National Disability Strategy Implementation Plan, to the Comprehensive Employment Strategy. Well, let me just tell you some facts. The Comprehensive Employment Strategy was to be part of the 13 to 15 National Disability Strategy Implementation Plan. Neither the Department of Social Protection or the Department of Jobs would have anything to do with sponsoring it. It finished up being sponsored by the Department of Justice and Equality and didn't get delivered until October 2015, within 3 months of the ending of the 3-year period. It is still being sponsored by the Department of Justice and Equality, not the Department of Jobs. Somebody figure that out for me. That first implementation plan, 13 to 15, that came as a commitment in February 2011 to be put in place. It took 2 years. It ran for its 3 years. The follow-up implementation plan, which has been mentioned in the Minister's speech, and he's talking about it soon to go to Cabinet, that was to commence in January 16. We're halfway through 17. These are issues. The chair of the implementation body for the Comprehensive Employment Strategy, Fergus Finlay, at the end of last year, at the end of its first year of operation, said, "I do not think one job will have been created." I'm not happy to be saying any of these things. I hope it doesn't work out like this, but don't be codded in relation to how difficult it is to implement. And I say that as much to my colleagues here as well. In the Department of Transport 4 weeks ago, when the strike with Bus Éireann, that department and its agents, the National Transport Authority, wasn't able to figure out that they were taking wheelchair-accessible buses off 3 routes to make savings, the Bus Éireann buses, leaving private operator buses. Not one of the buses was accessible, nor was it required to be accessible. Now, if that can happen with an implementation of something, we need to be very careful. We saw a man recently, a man who was blind, Robbie Sennett, took the state to court so that he could do one simple thing that's guaranteed in our Constitution, the right to vote in private. He was pushed to the complete limit and he won his case eventually. Not an issue that is a huge drain on the public purse. Elections hopefully don't happen too often. on referenda. So there are real issues about implementation and mindset within folk in different departments. Finally, or just coming to the end, a couple of other points. The Department of Justice and Equality has responsibility for providing a focal point for the promotion and coordination of disability policy, including the National Disability Implementation Plan. I tell you this, a plan that has to be whole of government can only be driven by the ward boss, and that is An Taoiseach, whoever An Taoiseach is. They can subcontract it out to different departments or whatever. The Department of Justice and their officials will say, we can coordinate, we can phone departments and ask them for stuff. That's what they can do, no more. It's a matter for the Taoiseach. Brexit wasn't passed on to some department to be dealt with. It was dealt with by An Taoiseach. And if this and anything to do with disability as a whole of government issue is to be dealt with, it has to be dealt with by the boss, who can turn to his or her colleagues on a weekly basis and say, what's happening, and I want to see action. So these are the places where the problems can come about. Senator Devine turned to Minister Harris and talked about the resources. The resources in health are one issue. Mindset is another, but resources and mindsets in other departments are equally important. To conclude, Cathaoirleach, this is a night of hope, and we must be careful. We must be careful. It's not about just passing this legislation. The Epson Act 13 years ago was passed. There are still significant parts of it not implemented. Right? The Disability Act the following year. The assessment of needs. That isn't triggered, except for just young children, I think. The Citizens Information Act 2007. One core piece of it to do with people with disabilities, the Director of Advocacy, never put in place and still not in place. And we have from 2015 the Assisted Decision Making Act, and there's delays in getting that done. So let's not buy a pup. We have to travel in hope and in confidence. But the legislation passed is not the legislation implemented. And when it involves a number of departments, it is a real tricky deal that successive governments have not dealt with. So let me conclude. I want to thank sincerely Senator O'Reilly. We first met almost 2 decades ago on the Eastern Regional Health Authority when we were younger men. And I'm absolutely committed to do everything in relation to this, but I think people need to be very careful. What happens in and between departments will either kill or drive and give life to this. Thank you, Cathaoirleach.